Let's bring you a bit of breaking news now. This morning, the chief executive of Heathrow has announced his resignation. After 9 years in charge, John Holland-Kaye informed the airport's board of his intention to stand down this year. And I'm pleased to say that John Holland-Kaye himself joins us now live from Heathrow. Very good morning to you. Thanks so much for talking to us.
Morning, Anna.
So why are you standing down?
Well, 9 years is a very long time for any chief executive, and particularly in an intense business like Heathrow, which is so important to the UK, so much in the public eye. But I'm really proud of what we've achieved in the last 9 years. But now that we have come through the worst of the crisis and I've led the business through the recovery, we've got a new regulatory period starting any time now. It's a good time for a new chief executive to come in and transform the business as much as I hope I have done over the last 9 years.
Well, yes, and Heathrow did last year regain its status as the busiest airport in Western Europe, but it had dropped down the rankings during the pandemic, hadn't it? In retrospect, looking back at that time, do you think the government overreacted as far as travel restrictions were concerned then?
Well, the UK certainly had tighter travel restrictions than any other country, and I think it's one of the reasons why UK aviation experienced a much deeper cut than happened in many other markets. The Europeans could still fly to each other. The US still had a big domestic market. And of course, there was no bailout for the UK aviation sector as happened elsewhere. So we really had to dig deep to survive. But I'm really proud of the way that we have since been able to recover. And just at Heathrow, we grew more in passenger numbers than any other airport in the world last year. That's a huge achievement, and it shows just how much demand there is for flying and just how strong Heathrow's hub airport model is in helping to connect all of Britain to global growth.
Should the government have acted differently, though, during the pandemic?
Well, that's a question for them, but I think we saw in the pandemic just how damaging it is to the UK economy to keep borders closed when you have incidents like this. And I think the borders were kept closed for too long, and that had a really damaging effect, not just on aviation, but on the wider economy. And the reason that matters is because the Heathrow is the biggest port, not just for people, but for goods as well. And 40% of all the UK's non-EU exports go on passenger planes from Heathrow. So while they're not flying, British companies can't get their goods to market. And we're starting to see the impact of that reduction in export activity and the ability to bring supply chain into the UK right now, with the UK economy falling behind some of our competitors, particularly in Europe.
You spent a great deal of your time in the job trying to get support for an expansion of Heathrow to get a third runway. That did get approval in 2018, but it was delayed because of COVID. So what's the situation now? Is that going to happen? And if so, when?
Yes, it will happen. And we'll be announcing our plans for how we're going to do that later in the year. And COVID has shown just how important it is that it does happen. And we're now an independent country. We can't rely on our competitors in Europe to get our goods to global markets. And we saw during the pandemic that the UK was cut off from Schiphol and Charles de Gaulle and Frankfurt 3 times. Now, if our exporting strategy depended on flying through those markets, that would be a disastrous strategy. We need to have a leading global hub here in the UK. And what we saw during the pandemic was just how important cargo was, with long-haul planes coming into Heathrow, bringing in PPE. But we also saw how spare capacity that briefly occurred at Heathrow allowed more regional flights to more long-haul markets, such as India, which we are poorly served to at the moment. And that shows the opportunity of expanding Heathrow, connecting all of Britain to all the growing markets of the world. And that's what we should deliver over the next decade or so.
Border Force staff have been taking industrial action this winter. Do you think those strikes could impact on people's summer holiday plans?
No, not at all, actually. I have to give credit to the Border Force team. They've done a fantastic job in managing through the strikes. The service, if anything, has been reported as being better than it normally is. And normally it's pretty good here at Heathrow. So great credit. And that is our focus as an airport. We are a consumer organisation. We want to get people through the airport and on their way as quickly as possible. But the border in particular is the first front door to the country. It's the first thing that people see when they arrive here. So it's so important that people have a good impression of the UK. And even just the fact that you can, passengers from 40 countries can use the e-gates at Heathrow, that's a massive advantage that the UK has. and it's something we want to build on to make the UK the most attractive place to do business.